What's going on, guys? It's Cimo. So today I'm bringing to you a meta-analysis for the January 2019 format. YCS Sydney came to a close this past weekend, and with YCS Chicago only a few weeks away, we have a lot to dissect from what happened over the past weekend and what we have to look forward to as we get closer to YCS Chicago. But before we get into it, if you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you guys don't miss a single upload. And if you haven't already, I am starting a brand new channel called Eat Out Vegas. It's where I go around my hometown showcasing some of the greatest places that I have the privilege of being able to eat at on, a regular basis. So definitely subscribe to that channel if you haven't already. We have a new episode coming out very soon. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get right into it. So normally I go right into the pie chart of the top 32 breakdown from a YCS, but this YCS's coverage was a little bit different than what we typically have. Now, YCS Sydney had just shy of 900 players. I believe the total count was like 872, which is pretty good. That's a pretty sizable number. Now, the thing is, typically when we have these events, we have some written coverage, but this time I couldn't find written coverage anywhere, so I had to go based off of the screenshots that the production team was kind enough to provide us. So the first thing I want to start off with is actually the entire deck breakdown for YCS Sydney. The reason I want to show you guys this is so you guys can have an understanding of what it looks like when you actually go into a YCS level event and kind of like the overall representation of what decks you might expect to be playing against, because it's very important to understand the metagame, because yes, while you can see there's tons of different decks on this list. I mean, you've got stuff like Cosmo, you've got Hero, you've got Noble Knights, but the numbers compared to the overall representation are so low that it's very unlikely that you're going to be playing these decks. You might play them once. I mean, that's very realistic, especially in the first couple of rounds. But what happens is when you take these numbers and start to get further and further into the tournament, the numbers start to really pan out, and you start to see that the best decks, which in this case were Sky Striker, Altergeist, and Thunder Dragon, in terms of overall representation, those decks are going to keep their numbers very high, even when the player count for the tournament starts to diminish. One thing that was very interesting is that Cyber Dragon actually had the 4th highest representation of all the decks in the tournament. I mean, even more so than Trickstar and Pendulum Magician. Even Rongamini had Turbo. That was really surprising to me, especially considering not a single Cyber Dragon made it into the top 16. But again, I guess this is just one of those things that we actually have the ability to see thanks to the production team. But I'm going to get now into the top 64 breakdown. Now, I'm not sure why we had a top 64 breakdown and not a top 32, but it is what it is. So again, now you're going to start to see how the decks start to pan out once we get into the later stages of the tournament. I mean, as you see here, we've got stuff like Sky Striker, Thunder Dragon, Altergeist. These are the decks we know for a fact are going to be the best decks of the format. I already covered that in my top 5 meta decks for the January 2019 format. But then following up behind, Burning Abyss, we have Pendulum Magician, Trickstar, and even though the numbers are small relative to Sky Striker, Thunder Dragon, and Altergeist, these are decks that are still able to compete in the metagame. These are like your more tier 2-ish / rogue options. But it just goes to show, even stuff like Prank Kids, which we saw pretty much win YCS Milan and also has been having some relative success not only on the regional level, but also at the ARGs that have been taking place since Milan. So again, this is kind of cool that we get to see this breakdown, and then this ultimately brings us to the top 16 pie chart. So again, it's not top 32, which I definitely would have preferred, but here is the top 16 breakdown for YCS Sydney. Now, starting off, you're going to definitely see something very interesting here, and that is Thunder Dragon taking up 6 of the top 32 slots, or actually rather top 16, because this isn't top 32. I'm so used to saying that it just came out that way naturally. But Thunder Dragon being at the top is very interesting. Now, the breakout strategy for Thunder Dragon here was Danger Brilliant Thunder Dragon. If you guys remember when Thunder Dragon first came out, playing the pure build was kind of the standard. We saw the OCG do this, so we kind of mimicked that. But even at YCS Niagara, the first event for Thunder Dragons, we saw Brilliant Fusion being incorporated. Now, this was interesting because It gave the deck a lot more depth, giving the extra normal summon, and allowed the deck to do a lot more things that it otherwise would have been very limited from doing thanks to the Brilliant Fusion engine being included. But now it has taken on a new form with dangers being included into the list. Now, the dangers add this very interesting dynamic because they all happen to be dark, so you've got the Allure of Darkness synergy still there since predominantly all of the Thunder Dragons are dark as well. But it also gives you fuel for your Chaos synergy, with stuff like, your BLS or your Levianeer, whatever Chaos monster you might play in your Thunder Dragon. We saw in some lists they were playing the Wyver Buster and the Collapse Serpent, which definitely are good for triggering the effects of your Thunder Dragons in the graveyard, so that's pretty neat. But one of the biggest reasons why Danger is so good is because not only does it give your deck card draw, but it gives your deck the ability to play not only under your opponent's Colossus, but make something like Curious, which gets you to one of the deck's ultimate monsters, Fairy Tale Snow. Now, we all know from the past how good of a card Fairy Tale Snow is, but man, it pretty much never goes away, and this is another deck where Fairy Tale Snow can shine. One of the reasons why this card is so good is because not only is it just dumpable easily off of something like Curious, which just takes 3 dark monsters with different types, which is so easy with Dangers and Thunder Dragons combined, but you also have the fact that it can banish the Thunder Dragons out of your graveyard or off of your field to trigger their effects, and you have a card that targets and flips monsters face down, meaning that it plays around the Thunder Dragon's effects, making it so that they are then destroyable. I mean, you can do stuff like blocking your opponent from Link summoning outside of your Thunder Dragon mirror matches. There's just so much utility that a card like Snow provides that it really is a nice inclusion into the strategy. Jesse Cotton managed to take second place at YCS Sydney, and you can see just by his list, this is pretty much what the standard Danger deck might be looking like moving forward, because a lot of other players were piloting something very similar to this. I know Bowden Temnick, World's Championship runner-up, was also playing this deck, and also some couple people that I know as well were playing it, so it's definitely going to catch on with popularity moving into YCS Chicago. You even see stuff being included in here like your Glow-Up Bulb and your Dotscaper. This just helps, further extend the deck's capabilities with being able to be used multiple times for Link summons. They're also dark, so you've got the capability of having more targets to be able to make Curious. There's just so much dimension to this deck, and I think that's what's really cool about it. So congrats to everyone who piloted and did very well. Thunder Dragon basically being the best deck to counteract Sky Striker, really is no surprise that it managed to take as many top cut slots as it did. That brings us on though to Altergeist, the second best deck in terms of overall top 16 representation, taking up 4 slots, and it kind of makes sense that if there's a Thunder Dragon dominated top cut, that Altergeist is going to follow suit. Here's the first place deck list. You guys can take a look for yourselves how good the deck was, and honestly, Altergeist is a very strong deck. We've seen time and time again it has been able to top YCS after YCS after YCS, and it's just gone to show that it's capable of even winning a YCS because it ultimately ended up winning YCS Sydney. Now, a lot of people kind of want to say, well, Rivalry of Warlords definitely is a big contributing factor, in addition to a card like Secret Village, when you have a metagame, especially when you look at the other charts, that Sky Striker has the highest representation. And while that's partially true, you still have to give Altergeist credit where it is due, and I definitely think that having a very solid Thunder Dragon matchup really kind of gave it the advantage that it needed to take over and ultimately win YCS Sydney. Going away from that though, Sky Striker did manage to take 2 of the top 16 slots, so Sky Striker hasn't really gone anywhere, and honestly, I think now that we've seen kind of how YCS Sydney is played out, Sky Striker players are going to fine-tune their decks even more so for this new Danger Thunder Dragon incarnation, because now that we have this defined, I think Sky Striker was kind of just doing its own thing, but there are certain ways that can help better counteract these different strategies, so I think that's something that definitely Sky Strikers are going to take into account. And lastly, just wrapping up with the few one-of decks here, there was a one-of BA deck, there was a one-of Pendulum deck, I think there was a Prank Kids deck in there, and then one Ranga Miniad Turbo. So The biggest things here, BA is still doing what BA does best. I mean, Burning Abyss has even taken on some more tricks of its own, but it's still really good overall. It's got pretty decent matchups overall across the entire metagame. It just doesn't really excel in any given area, but it managed to get to top 8, so that's pretty good for what it's worth. Pendulum Magician, again, another deck that manages to sneak in always like one top cut in the top 32 or top 16 of these YCSs, so very good player there. And then we also had Prank Kids, which again, a lot of people thought was going to be the one-hit wonder from YCS Milan, still showing that it's able to compete even several weeks later. I think this is going to be one of those decks you definitely want to still keep on your radar, but it's definitely not as hyped as a lot of people might have hoped. And then last but not least, Ronga Miniad Turbo only taking 1 in the top 16. I think this is the biggest shock for me. I think a lot of players were going to be wanting to play combo decks like this and Slash Draw FDK just because they're so easy, and especially if you achieve the win condition, you're pretty much always going to win. And not to mention, when you look at how the metagame has slowed down relatively, not a lot of these deck lists are playing a ton of hand traps. Now, post sideboard games 2 and 3, that might change a little bit, but you should have a lot of really easy game 1s if you're playing these heavy combo based decks, and ultimately just like lock out your opponent from playing or just win the game right on the spot. So I think that's the biggest surprise for me, but ultimately, we'll have to see what happens for Chicago, because going into YCS Chicago, the biggest factor is that Savage Strike will be coming out, and there's a lot of very powerful cards that a lot of these top meta decks can make use of, so we'll just have to see how the meta shapes up after YCS Chicago. But guys, those are just my thoughts. Let me know down in the comments what you guys think about this meta analysis and how you think YCS Chicago might shape up in a few weeks. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. So guys, thank you so much for watching the video. Be sure to like the video as always, subscribe to the channel for more amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content, and if you found this video helpful, consider supporting me on Patreon or becoming a YouTube channel member, because just by showing your support in any way that you can, you're investing in my ability to continue bringing you amazing Yu-Gi-Oh content. So thanks so much again, and we'll see you next time.